Thank you, Mr Chairman. I think, as other speakers have said, the Labour Party supports this bill, has suggested some supplementary order papers to slightly amend it in a way that we think would improve it. Despite what we see in the media, New Zealand hasn't got a rising crime problem overall. In fact, crime levels in New Zealand have dropped pretty consistently for the last decade. There have been two exceptions to that, which are of concern to this Parliament, and I'm sure to people on all sides of the House. One is the weird, really violent crime in a way which is almost fantasy crime. Some of it drug-related, relating to P, has been on the increase, and that's obviously a concern. But then the other area of crime that's been on the increase has been domestic violence. And it is a moot point as to how much of that increase in recorded incidents of domestic violence is occasioned by an increase in the reporting of that violence and how much of it actually represents an increase in actual violence. But it's probably been a bit of both. And therefore it's appropriate that we in this Parliament try and do what we can to improve that situation. Now, obviously, the biggest things long term are changes in societal attitudes and acceptance of violence in communities needs to decrease. But in addition to that, we need to have appropriate legal mechanisms to ensure the proper protection of members of the community. And actually, Hilary Calvert, who recently arrived in this chamber, I know has some experience in these family court-related matters, and I look forward to her contribution too. Protection orders are the mechanism which is available to people to go to the court and say, look, I need to be protected from a violent person who I've been in a relationship with, and it's quite common for those protections to be needed. In fact, it's sadly common for those protections to be necessary, not just for the other person in the relationship, the other adult in the relationship, but also for children. It's also a sad reality that most often these protections are needed by women in respect of violence or the threat of violence from men. Now, the point of contention that has become narrowed here, and I think it's really the main point of contention between Labour and National now, is what you do in respect of children as they start to become adults, and what's the point at which they should move from protection as a child of the family and have some sort of separate legal status, and what ought to be the default position. The position that the government is taking in respect of this legislation is that where a child resides in the home, then protection should continue for them until the order lapses. But when they leave home, the order should lapse if they're 17 years of age. And it's on that narrow point that we disagree with the government and have put up two supplementary order papers that I'd be interested in hearing the government's response on. The first one that we propose is that the order that has been for the benefit of the child and the family continue for the benefit of effectively a person who's becoming a young adult indefinitely until they opt to cancel it, or until some other party opts to apply to the court to cancel it. It wouldn't be just the child who could apply to cancel it. It could be a parent, it could be someone else who has an interest that thinks that this has now become redundant and it ought to lapse. And if people think that that's going too far, then we've got a second supplementary order paper, and we say that at least until that person becomes 18, the protection that they are afforded through the protection order should automatically follow them when they leave home into their flatting situation. And that seems to me to be a pretty practical middle course if the government doesn't like the open-ended effect of our first supplementary order paper, which we would prefer. So, Mr Chairman, this is a narrow point, but it is an important point. I can envisage many instances where a lot of young people actually won't give any thought to the legal the effect of their leaving home on their protected status under a protection order. If it has been necessary to include that child in the name of the protection order in the first place, it seems to me that it's unlikely that the change of place of residence is a automatic precondition, or that we can assume that necessarily makes that young person safe in their new situation when they wouldn't have been safe, Mr. Chairman.
The Honourable David Parker.
When they wouldn't have been safe in their original home situation. And if they were to have been safe in their original home situation, then presumably they wouldn't have been named in the protection order, or some step would have been taken to let that protection order lapse. That said, Mr. Speaker, we agree that this is good legislation overall. I won't take any more time to speak to other particular parts in the committee stage because that would be inappropriate, and I just would like to have a response from the Minister on that narrow point.